The station was loud. It was always loud. Velthar Diplomatic Station floated in the cold orbit above the gas giant Sorrel 4, and on most days it smelled like 6 different alien atmospheres all fighting each other at once. The corridors were wide and silver-white, full of delegates, advisors, guards, and merchants from a dozen worlds. Banners hung from the ceiling in colors that had no names in the human language. Voices overlapped in clicks and hums and low rolling tones that made the walls vibrate slightly if you stood still long enough. Ambassador Crew of the Dorvani Empire walked through those corridors like he owned them. He was tall, blue-grey, and dressed in armor silk that caught the light and threw it back harder. His aide walked 2 steps behind him. His guards walked 2 steps behind the aide. He had been in politics for 40 years and he had never once entered a room quietly. That was the point. Princess Valera of the Xyrath Star Empire arrived in a different way. Her ship docked at the upper bay, and when the doors opened, 12 of her personal guard came through first. Then her 2 senior advisors. Then Valera herself, dressed in deep violet, moving with the kind of ease that came not from practice but from never having been told she couldn't. She was young for a princess, barely past her 2nd decade of formal education, but her eyes were sharp and she had a habit of watching rooms before she entered them fully. She watched this one. The main negotiation chamber was large and round, with seats arranged in a wide circle around a central table. Every species had a designated section. The Dorvani section was prominent and well decorated. The Torathai had brought a full delegation of 9. The Velkai had sent 3 senior elders and a team of analysts. Several other species filled the rest of the circle with the usual noise of diplomacy. Papers, whispered arguments, last-minute instructions passed between advisors. The human section had 1 chair, and in that chair sat a man drinking coffee. He was not particularly large. He was not particularly impressive looking. He wore a plain grey coat, the kind a person might wear to a quiet meeting on a cold morning. His hair was dark and cut short. He had a small scar near his jaw that he clearly didn't think was worth explaining. He sat with his arms resting on the table and his eyes moving slowly around the room, not nervously, not with suspicion, just the way a person looks around a room they have decided to understand. His name was Derek Cole. He was humanity's sole delegate to the Velthar Summit, sent on behalf of the Galactic Compact's Human Member Council, and he had arrived 3 hours early, found the coffee machine near the service entrance, figured out how to operate it, and been sitting there ever since. Valera's senior advisor, an old Xyrath male named Councillor Don, leaned toward her and said quietly, "The human came alone." "I can see that," Valera said. "It's an insult to the summit. They should have sent at least a small delegation." Valera didn't answer. She was still watching Derek Cole. He had noticed her looking. She could tell because his eyes had passed over her section twice now, unhurried, taking in the detail of her guard formation with the mild interest of someone reading a menu. She didn't know why, but that bothered her slightly. Ambassador Crew made his feelings known before the session even opened. He approached the central table during the informal greeting period and looked at the human section, at the 1 chair, the 1 man, the half-empty cup of coffee, and made a sound in his throat that translated roughly to amused contempt. "1 representative," he said, loud enough for the nearby sections to hear. "Humanity sends 1 representative to a summit of this importance. Does your council not understand what this gathering means?" Derek Cole looked up. He had a calm face. Not blank, calm. There was a difference. Blank meant nothing was happening inside. Calm meant something was happening inside and it had decided not to show itself. "We understood it fine," Derek said. "I'm enough." Crew stared at him for a moment, then made that sound again and walked away. Several nearby delegates murmured to each other. One of the Torathai delegation laughed in their clicking way. Derek picked up his coffee and drank the rest of it. Valera watched this and said nothing. She was thinking. The session opened with the usual ceremony, readings of the Compact Charter, formal introductions of each delegation, a statement of purpose from the station director. Valera gave her opening remarks cleanly and with authority. Crew gave his with theatre. The Torathai gave theirs with numbers and charts. Most species use their time to signal power and position. Derek Cole stood when it was humanity's turn. He spoke for 90 seconds. He said that humanity was glad to be present, that they had reviewed all current proposals, and that they were prepared to discuss each item on the agenda in good faith. He sat down. There was a short silence. Then the session moved forward. He didn't say much for the rest of the afternoon. He listened more than anyone else in the room. when a debate broke out between the Dovani and the Torathai over mineral extraction rights in the outer belt. Most delegates leaned in and began speaking over each other. Derek leaned back slightly and watched. When Villera's advisor submitted a formal counterproposal on transit lane boundaries, Derek read it fully before responding, which was more than most delegates did. When he did speak, it was brief, and somehow managed to name the exact point that everyone else had been circling around without ever landing on. Villera noticed this. She filed it away. The session closed without resolution on the major items, which surprised no one. These things took time. Delegates returned to their quarters. Advisors huddled in corners. The station buzzed with the quiet industry of people preparing for tomorrow. Villera walked back toward her section's quarters with Councillor Don at her side, and as they passed the service corridor she saw Derek Cole at the coffee machine again. He had a small notebook open and was writing something in it, not on a datapad, an actual physical notebook with a pen, and he was doing it with the complete focus of someone who had no idea the rest of the galaxy was still running. "What do you know about him?" Villera asked Don. "Very little," Don admitted. "He was a soldier before he was an envoy. Beyond that, the human records on him are sparse. Notably sparse, actually." "Notably," she repeated. "It could mean nothing," Don said. "Humans are disorganized record keepers." "Or," Villera said, "it means someone decided those records shouldn't be easy to find." She looked back once more at the man with the notebook and the coffee. He hadn't looked up. He was still writing. He looked, in every visible way, like the least dangerous person on the station. That was the part she kept coming back to. 3 hours later, the long-range sensors lit up. Unknown ships had entered the system. Fast, military configuration, running dark. The station alarms did not go off immediately. They should have. But by the time they did, it was already too late to matter. The first explosion came from the eastern docking bay. It was not a large explosion. That was the professional part of it. Whoever had planned this knew that a large explosion would trigger emergency bulkheads and seal the station into isolated sections. A small, precise explosion in the right place took out the sensor relay and left everything else open. The lights flickered. The intercom cut out for 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, the Kreth came through the airlock. They moved fast. Villera heard them before she saw them. The heavy sound of armored boots on metal flooring, the sharp crack of stun weapons, the voices of compact security guards shouting once and then going quiet. She was in the corridor near the east wing when it started, and Councillor Don grabbed her arm and pulled her back toward the main chamber before she could see anything clearly. "Move," he said, and his voice had lost all its political smoothness. "Now." They made it to the main chamber along with most of the other delegates. It happened quickly, the way bad things usually do. One moment the summit was a collection of important people preparing for another long day of careful arguments, and the next moment those same people were being directed into the center of the round chamber by soldiers in black and red armor, weapons raised, moving with the organized calm of people who had done this before. The Kreth Syndicate. Villera recognized the colors. A militant faction, expelled from the Compact 7 years ago, who had spent the time since making themselves useful to anyone who would pay them and dangerous to everyone else. Their armor was not elegant. It was functional, dented in places, repaired in others, built to work rather than to impress. Their commander was a broad, heavy-shouldered figure called Veth. He walked into the chamber with his helmet off, which was either confidence or arrogance, and possibly both. His face was scarred in the diagonal pattern that Kreth warriors earned through battle, and he wore those scars the way some people wore medals. He stood at the center of the chamber and looked at the assembled delegates with the flat expression of a man doing a job. "You will all remain here," he said. His translator device turned the words into smooth, compact standard. "No one will be harmed who cooperates. We have demands. When they are met, you will be released. Until then, you are guests." He said the last word the way people say words they don't believe. Ambassador Crew stood up immediately and began speaking about treaties and violations and the consequences that would follow. Veth looked at him without interest for about 4 seconds, then nodded at one of his soldiers, who pressed something against Crew's neck that made the ambassador sit down and stop talking. Villera stayed still. She was counting the soldiers she could see, 12 in the chamber, probably more in the corridors. She was looking at the exits. She was doing the thing she had been trained to do in a crisis, which was mostly observe and wait and do not make yourself a useful target. She was also doing one other thing. She was noticing who wasn't in the room. All the other delegates were present or accounted for. All the senior advisors. All the guards who hadn't been taken out in the initial sweep. Every important person on the station seemed to be sitting on the floor of the main chamber, being very careful not to make eye contact with armed soldiers. Derek Cole was not there. She thought about it. She hadn't seen him during the initial rush to the chamber. He had not been in the corridor. She hadn't seen him taken down by Kreth soldiers. He had simply stopped being visible at some point between the first explosion and now, and she hadn't noticed the exact moment it happened. The chamber was quiet. The hostages Saturday. The Kreth soldiers stood. Commander Veth moved to a side room to begin transmitting his demands to whoever was listening outside. 20 minutes passed. Then, from somewhere down the north corridor, there was a sound. It was brief. A short, compressed sound, not quite a weapon discharge, not quite a physical impact, something in between, followed by silence. The two Kreth soldiers nearest the north entrance looked at each other. One of them moved toward the corridor door and opened it a few centimeters to look out. He pulled his head back quickly and said something in the Kreth language to his partner. His partner pressed a communicator and said something else. Neither of them opened the door again. 5 minutes later, there was another sound. This one came from the east side, near the service corridor. Shorter than the first. Then silence again. The Kreth soldiers in the chamber had stopped looking casual. They were talking to each other in low tones. A third soldier came in from a side entrance, said something quickly, and left. The first two exchanged a look that Valera, sitting 15 feet away, could read without any difficulty. They were not sure what was happening, and not being sure was frightening them. The sounds continued, gradually, over the next 30 minutes. Always brief. Always followed by silence. Never getting dramatically closer, never building to anything obvious. Just continuing, steady and unhurried, like a machine that had been switched on and was working its way through a task. Valera kept her breathing even. Around her, other delegates were not managing as well. Councillor Don had his eyes closed. Ambassador Crew had not spoken since being made to sit down. The Torathai delegates were pressed together in a tight group. Everyone was listening to the sounds and trying to understand them. The chamber door opened. A human woman came through it low and fast, staying near the wall, one arm pressed against her side where she was bleeding through a torn sleeve. She was young, mid-20s, with short hair and the expression of someone operating on focus alone. She wore a compact security badge and carried a sidearm that she kept pointed at the floor as she moved. Her name was Kara Holt. She was one of 3 human security personnel assigned to the station, and she moved through the chamber quickly, reading the layout in one sweep. She reached Valera's position and crouched down beside her without ceremony. "Stay low," she said. Her voice was steady. "It's almost done." "What's almost done?" Valera asked quietly. Kara didn't answer immediately. She was listening to something, the sounds in the corridors, or the absence of them. Then the main door opened. Derek Cole stood in the frame. His grey coat had a long tear across one shoulder. There was blood on his left forearm, dried and dark, from a cut that had not been treated. His hair was slightly out of order. He looked, in the grand and complete summary of his appearance, like a man who had been moderately inconvenienced by a task that had taken longer than expected. He looked at the room. He looked at the Kreth soldiers, who were staring at him with weapons raised and expressions that had moved clearly past uncertainty into something more honest. He looked at the hostages. He looked at Valera. "Sorry about the wait," he said. He stepped into the room and the remaining Kreth soldiers, after a moment that lasted about 3 full seconds, which is a long time, in moments like that, put their weapons down. Commander Veth did not come out of the side room. When Kara went in to check, Veth was sitting against the wall, unhurt, with his communicator in pieces on the floor beside him and the look on his face of someone who had recently been made to understand something he had not previously understood. Valera stood slowly. She looked at Derek Cole, who was now speaking quietly with Kara, checking her injury, telling her to sit down, already thinking about the next step. She had watched Zyrath warlords march into battle. She had read accounts of the great generals of 5 different empires. She had grown up surrounded by strength and power and the performance of both. She knew what a dangerous being looked like when it was being dangerous. This was not that. This was something else, something quieter and more complete. Like the difference between a fire and a forge. The fire was dramatic. The forge simply made things that lasted. She stood in the middle of the chamber and she could not stop looking at him, this ordinary-seeming man in a torn grey coat, and she could not quite name what she was feeling. She thought it might be awe. She also thought it might be the beginning of fear. She was not sure which one worried her more. The Xyrath Imperial Court was a room built to make people feel small. The ceiling was tall enough to lose detail in. The walls were pale stone carved with the names and victories of every Xyrath emperor going back 1400 years. The floor was polished so finely that it reflected the figures standing on it like a mirror. The light came from above, steady and white, and it fell on everyone equally, which was the court's quiet way of reminding every person in it that the only one who truly mattered was the one sitting at the far end on the raised chair. Emperor Verith sat in that chair and listened. His daughter Valera stood in the center of the floor and gave her report. She had been trained to give reports clearly and without emotion, and she did exactly that. She described the summit, the arrival of the Kreth, the taking of hostages, the response. She used precise language. She included time estimates. She described the outcome: all hostages recovered, no fatalities among the delegates, compact security forces retaking the station within 2 hours of the initial breach. She described Derek Cole accurately and completely. When she was done, the court was quiet for a moment. Then various advisors began speaking at once, about the Kreth, about the compact response, about security failures, about diplomatic implications. The Emperor raised one hand and they stopped. "The human," he said. He had a low voice for a Xyrath male, and a habit of making 2 words feel like a full sentence. "Tell me again what he did." Valera told him again. She used the same words, mostly. But the second time, even she heard how strange it sounded. One man, alone, moving through a station held by trained Kreth soldiers, taking them out one by one in near silence while the rest of the people on the station sat in one room and listened to the sounds of it happening and waited. He was not afraid, she said, and then stopped, because that wasn't quite the right word. He was not changed by it. He came back into the room and he looked like himself. The same as before. Like none of it had cost him anything. The court murmured. It was not a comfortable sound. At the edge of the room, near the wall of records and documents, stood Councillor Don. He was old enough to have a long memory and careful enough to have kept records of most of it. He had been quiet during Valera's report, but now he stepped forward, carrying a flat data reader, and asked the Emperor's permission to speak. "I have been pulling records since we returned," Don said. He looked at the data reader the way a person looks at something that has surprised them. On Derek Cole specifically, and on humanity's military history more broadly. He began to read. He told the court about the siege of the Myardan processing colony, a human settlement that had been cut off during a border conflict 12 years ago. A squad of 8 human soldiers had held the colony's outer wall for 11 days against a Rogadi raiding force that numbered in the hundreds. They had no resupply. Their communications were down for the last 4 days. When a compact relief force finally broke through, they found all 8 soldiers still at their posts, alive, and the wall still standing. When asked afterward why they hadn't retreated into the colony and fortified the interior instead, which would have been the strategically reasonable choice, their squad leader said that retreating would have meant leaving the outer greenhouse structures undefended, and that the colonists needed those structures to eat through the winter. So they stayed at the wall. The court listened. Don told them about the battle above the Korath Nebula 6 years ago. A human patrol vessel, a small one, crew of 14, had been separated from its fleet group during an engagement with a syndicate attack force. The fleet needed time to regroup and jump. The human vessel had taken serious damage in the first exchange. By any reasonable military calculation, they should have jumped out immediately and saved the crew. Instead, they turned toward the enemy and continued engaging, drawing fire, keeping the syndicate's attention fixed on them for long enough that the rest of the fleet could pull back safely. The syndicate hit them with everything they had. The human ship took 7 direct strikes. It was barely recognizable as a vessel by the end of it. It limped home anyway. All 14 crew survived, though not without injury. The captain filed a routine report that described the engagement in plain language and made no particular note of anything unusual. Don paused on that detail. "No particular note of anything unusual," he repeated. The court was very quiet. Then Don came to Cal 9. Dorvani Prison Station Cal 9 had been the subject of a sealed report for 5 years. What the public record stated was simple. Over 200 compact prisoners of war, humans, Taurothai, and several other allied species, were being held there illegally during a period of disputed territorial negotiation. Officially, the Dorvani denied the station existed. No rescue operation was ever formally authorized because to authorize one was to admit the existence of a problem that the compact was not ready to escalate over. What the sealed internal record showed, the ones Don had spent 2 days gaining access to, was something else. One person had entered the station alone. Entry method was unknown. The station's internal sensors, which were very good, showed nothing unusual until the moment they started showing locked doors opening from the inside. One after another, in a path that moved through the station's lowest levels first, then up, then across to the holding wing, then back toward the docking bay. 211 prisoners were found missing in the morning. The guards were alive, all of them, but a number were found in positions that made it clear they had not chosen to take the rest voluntarily. Not a single alarm had been triggered during the operation. Not one. The Dorvani had never released an official account. They simply closed the station and did not speak of it publicly. The operative's name had been redacted from all shared reports. Don looked up from his data reader. The name on the internal human record, he said, the one that was never shared with the compact at large, is Derek Cole. The room absorbed this slowly, the way a cold floor absorbs heat, reluctantly and only after time. Vilira looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at Councillor Don with an expression that asked a question she wasn't ready to put into words. Don answered it anyway. He was 26 years old when he carried out the Kel 9 operation, he said. Alone. No backup. No sanctioned support. He requested the mission himself and was denied 3 times before someone decided to lose the paperwork. Emperor Verith IV was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that no one in the court had expected. He said it calmly, in the way he said most things, but it landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The Dorvani border dispute, he said. We need it resolved without a military engagement. We cannot afford one, not this season, not with the Eastern Fleet's repositioning. He turned his gaze toward his diplomatic council. We will request, through appropriate compact channels, that humanity's official representative to the Dorvani negotiation be Derek Cole. His advisors looked at each other. Not as a threat, the Emperor said. Simply as a choice of envoy. Vilira understood immediately. The message would not need to be stated. The Dorvani would read the name, and they would remember Kel 9, and they would understand what the Zyrath Empire was communicating without a single word of aggression being committed to paper. It was clean. It was precise. It was, she thought, the kind of move that her father had spent decades learning to make. And somewhere in a small grey ship travelling toward the next port of call, a man who had liberated 200 prisoners alone and then filed routine paperwork about it was almost certainly drinking coffee and thinking about something completely different. The message was drafted that night. The Human Council received it by morning. 2 days later, the reply came back. Derek Cole would serve as humanity's envoy to the Dorvani negotiation. He had accepted without comment. The message arrived at the Dorvani Imperial Palace on a Tuesday morning. It came through the official compact diplomatic channel, formatted correctly, sealed with the appropriate credentials, and addressed to the office of Emperor Dorith of the Dorvani. It was routed first to the palace's communications desk, then to the senior diplomatic staff, and then, because of a flag in the system that automatically escalated anything related to the border dispute negotiations, to the desk of Princess Saris. Saris was in the middle of a briefing when her aide set it in front of her. She held up one finger toward the advisor who was speaking, picked up the message, and read it. She read it once. She set it down. She picked it up and read it again. Then she set it down a second time, carefully, the way a person sets down a glass they are not certain is empty. Who else has seen this? She asked. The diplomatic desk and General Orvitha's office, her aide said. They forwarded it to you simultaneously. Saris nodded. She told the briefing room to take a short break. She sent a message to General Orvith asking him to come to the East Council chamber. Then she walked to that chamber, sat down, and spent the 5 minutes it took the general to arrive reading everything she had in her files on human military personnel, which was not as much as she would have liked. Orvith came in without ceremony. He was a large figure, even by Dorvani standards, broad-shouldered, grey-plated, with a kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller. He had commanded 3 major military engagements in his career and won all 3, and he walked like someone who had forgotten that losing was an option. He sat across from Saris and looked at her. She slid the message across the table. He read it. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes moved over the name listed as humanity's designated envoy, and then he went very still in the specific way that large, confident beings go still when something has surprised them in a way they don't want to admit. Is it the same one? Saris asked. Orveth looked up. Yes, he said. The words sat between them for a moment. Saris had been raised to be composed. Dorvani royalty did not display panic. It was considered not just undignified but strategically foolish, since panic told your enemies what you valued. She had sat through supply crises and fleet alerts and 2 separate assassination attempts, and none of those things had made her voice do what it did in the next moment, which was drop to a tight, careful whisper that she had to work to keep controlled. We need to renegotiate the offer, she said. The border concessions, all of them. The outer lanes, the mineral access rights, the survey zones. Offer everything. File the paperwork today. Orveth stared at her. Saris. I'm serious. Send the message back to the compact and tell them the Dorvani are willing to discuss full concession terms on the core dispute. And ask, politely, if humanity might be willing to send a different representative. You want to give up the border. I want to resolve this, she said. Today. Without that man walking into this palace. There was silence in the council chamber. Outside the tall windows, the capital city of Dovar Prime moved through its morning in the pale gold light, and none of the people out there knew what was being decided at the palace table, and Saris found herself thinking, distantly, that she would very much like to be one of those people right now. Orveth leaned back in his seat. He was not a man who gave ground easily, and it showed. We have a full military garrison, he said. The palace is defended. We have perimeter sensors and response teams on standby. He would be coming here as a diplomat, not as. I know what he would be coming as, Saris said. She stood up. She moved to the side of the room where the records terminal was, and she pulled up a file she had flagged 3 days ago when the negotiations began escalating and she started doing her research. She turned the display toward Orveth. Cal 9, she said. He looked at the file. He had seen it before, had written part of the internal response report himself, years ago, when he was a junior commander. Looking at it again now, in this context, with this conversation happening around it, was a different experience than it had been the first time. The file showed the station layout, the internal sensor logs, the path of open doors, the timeline. 4 hours and 12 minutes, Saris said. From the moment the first door opened to the moment the docking bay cleared. 211 prisoners. He moved through 4 security checkpoints, a guarded central hub, and a monitored cell block. Our guards they were not harmed seriously, but they were managed, like variables in a problem being solved. She paused. We never got a clear image. Our cameras caught a shape, a suggestion. Nothing usable. By the time the morning shift found what had happened, there was nothing left to follow. He was already gone. She closed the file. I have read every account we have of this man. I have read the Velthar incident reports that came through the Compact's open channels last month. I have read the Kreth commander's statement, which is brief and which I found troubling. Troubling how? Orveth asked. Veth is not a frightened being, Saris said. He has fought in 11 engagements. He is not easily disturbed. His statement about the events at Velthar Station describes Derek Cole in language that Veth clearly did not want to use and used anyway because he apparently could not find other words. Orveth was quiet. We have 20 soldiers to every one of him, he said finally. It came out slightly less steady than he intended. Saris looked at him for a long moment. That's what the Kreth thought, she said. The silence in the room this time was longer. It was Orveth who broke it, and when he did, the hawkish certainty that he usually carried had shifted into something more measured. The concessions you're proposing, he said slowly. The outer lane rights and the survey zones, those are significant. The Emperor won't accept. The Emperor, Saris said carefully, will listen to me, because I'm going to explain to him exactly who is coming and exactly what the records say, and then I'm going to ask him whether he would rather lose a border negotiation or have that man inside this palace for any length of time. She gathered the files. And then the Emperor will make his own decision. She was right about that. The Emperor listened. He read the files. He made his decision within an hour, which was faster than Saris had expected. The formal offer of concession was sent through the Compact channel by noon. The reply came back the following morning. The compact acknowledged the Dorvani's revised offer. The territorial concessions were noted and would be included in the formal agreement. Humanity's representative would still be attending the negotiation session. The compact required it as part of the standard process for border dispute agreements. Derek Cole was still coming. On the second day after that, aboard a small, unremarkable envoy vessel called the Clearwater, moving through the edge of Dorvani space at a comfortable cruising speed, a man named Nate Briggs sat in the pilot's seat with his boots up on the console and his attention on a card game he was playing against the ship's basic navigation computer. He was losing. He was not bothered by this. Behind him, in the small crew space, Derek Cole sat at the fold-out table with a book open in front of him. It was a physical book, old, slightly creased at the spine, and he was about 2/3 through it. There was a cup of coffee near his left hand. The heating element under the cup had gone cold, but he hadn't noticed yet. "Do you know anything about Dorvani Palace food?" Nate asked without turning around. "Not really," Derek said, turning a page. "I heard they do something interesting with protein paste," Nate said. "Like, they ferment it. You think they'd let us try it?" "Probably," Derek said. "Nice." Nate lost another round to the navigation computer. "You nervous?" Derek turned another page. "No." "Right," Nate said. "Obviously not." He won a round by accident and looked surprised. "What are you reading?" "History," Derek said. "Whose history?" Derek considered this. "Everybody's," he said. Nate nodded as though this were a satisfying answer. It wasn't, particularly, but that was fine. The Clearwater moved through the dark at a comfortable speed, and outside the viewport the stars were quiet and cold, and inside the small warm ship a man who had walked alone through an enemy prison station and left 200 people free was finishing his book, and he looked, in every visible way, entirely at peace. The Dorvani capital was 3 hours away. The Clearwater docked at Dover Prime's diplomatic port on a grey morning. The sky above the capital was the colour of old silver, and the city spread out in every direction from the port in clean, wide lines. A very Dorvani kind of city, built for function first and beauty second, every curve and corner serving a purpose. The air smelled like cold stone and something faintly metallic, which Nate decided he liked, and which Derek didn't comment on either way. The honor guard waiting at the dock was larger than standard protocol required. A formal diplomatic arrival for an envoy of Derek's rank called for 6 soldiers and 1 senior aide. There were 22 soldiers waiting at the dock, all in full combat armor, arranged in 2 careful lines. Their weapons were formal carry, meaning pointed at the ground, but they were not ceremonial weapons. They were the kind that worked. Derek stepped off the ramp and looked at the formation. He was dressed in his plain grey envoy coat with humanity's diplomatic seal on the left shoulder. He carried his case with the agreement documents. He looked at the 22 soldiers for a moment, then at the senior aide standing at the head of the formation. "Thank you for the welcome," Derek said pleasantly. "Do you know if there's good coffee in the palace?" The aide blinked. Yes, I believe so." "Great," Derek said. "Lead the way." Nate fell into step beside Derek and said nothing, which was unusual for Nate, but the sight of 22 armed soldiers arranged to receive 1 diplomat had recalibrated his conversational instincts somewhat. They were taken through the palace's outer corridors and into the formal negotiation wing. The palace was impressive up close. The stone was the same pale color as the city but carved with detailed patterns that weren't quite decorative and weren't quite structural, somewhere between the two. The ceilings were high. The guards at every interior door were also in full armor. Doors were opened ahead of them and closed behind them with the smooth efficiency of a process that had been rehearsed. Nate leaned toward Derek and said quietly, "They're treating you like a bomb." "I know," Derek said. "Does that bother you?" Derek thought about it for a step or two. "No," he said. They were brought into the formal negotiation chamber. It was a long room with a table at its center, dark wood, very clean, with documents and data readers already arranged at both sides. The Dorvani delegation was already seated. 3 senior officials, 2 legal advisors, and at the head of their side of the table, Princess Saris. She was younger than Derek had expected, though he kept that thought to himself. She was composed in the way that people who have worked hard at composure are composed. It was real, but you could see the frame of effort underneath it if you looked. She had a flat data reader in front of her, and her hands were resting on the table with the deliberate stillness of a person making sure their hands were still. She watched Derek walk in and take his seat with the focused attention of someone who had been told a great deal about a thing and was now seeing the thing for the first time and measuring the distance between description and reality. Derek set his case on the table, opened it, and took out the agreement documents. He looked at the chamber, at the high ceiling, at the carved walls. "This is a good room," he said. "How old is the palace?" Saris answered before she meant to. 600 years, she said. The original structure. The wings were added later. "It's well built," Derek said, and he sounded like he meant it, which somehow made Saris feel slightly off balance in a way she didn't have words for. The session opened. The lead Dorvani official, a careful, dry-voiced administrator named Pell, went through the formal structure of the session, naming the points of agreement already reached through prior correspondence and the points that remained to be resolved. It was a short list, thanks to Saris's concessions of the previous day. 3 items remained: the exact coordinates of the new border line, the timeline for withdrawing survey equipment from the disputed zones, and a joint statement of resolution for the compact record. Derek listened to all of this. He asked one question about the survey timeline that caused a 15-minute side discussion between the Dorvani advisors before they gave him an answer. He accepted the answer, made a note, and moved on. On the border coordinates, the Dorvani proposed a line that was reasonable and slightly favorable to them. Derek looked at the coordinates for a while. He pulled out his own map reference from the case and placed it on the table. He pointed to a specific point on the line and said that there was a small compact monitoring relay at that location that would technically fall into Dorvani territory under the proposed coordinates, and that the relay's position made it relevant to shipping lane tracking for 3 different routes, which made it relevant to several other compact species, and that it might be wise to adjust the line by 8 units at that point to keep the relay in neutral space. The Dorvani advisors conferred. They checked their own maps. They conferred again. The lead official said they could accommodate an adjustment at that point. Derek thanked him and made another note. It continued this way for 5 hours, with a short break at midday during which someone brought coffee and Nate discovered that the Dorvani fermented protein paste was not for him, which he communicated to Derek in a whispered review that lasted most of the break. By late afternoon, every item on the list was resolved. The joint statement was drafted, reviewed, corrected in 2 small places, and approved. The documents were prepared. Pell, the lead official, made a brief formal closing address. Derek gave one in return, short, gracious, and precise in exactly the way his opening remarks at Velfar had been. Then it was done. The Dorvani delegation began gathering their materials. Nate stretched his arms and made a quiet sound of relief. The honor guard at the chamber doors remained exactly where it had been all day. Saris did not immediately stand. She was looking at the documents in front of her, signed, sealed, complete, and she was thinking about the day, arranging it in her memory. She would give her report to her father tonight, and it would be a good report. Every demand met. Every line resolved. The dispute was over. She looked up and found that Derek Cole was still at his side of the table, his own materials mostly packed, and he was looking at her with a calm, straightforward expression. "You made concessions before I arrived," he said. It was not an accusation. It was barely even an observation. It was simply a fact, stated plainly, the way he stated most things. "Yes," she said. "The outer lane rights and the survey zones. Those were significant." They were. He nodded slowly. He looked like he understood something, though he didn't say what. Saris had prepared to feel relieved when this day ended. She did feel relieved. She also felt, unexpectedly, the pull of a question she had been carrying since the message had first arrived, and she found, now that it was quiet and the room was mostly empty and the day was nearly done, that she could not quite leave without asking it. "Cal 9, she said. Derek looked at her. He waited. "After it was done," she said, "you could have used it. We knew you'd been there, eventually. We knew the name. The compact knew. You could have held it over us. Made demands. Used it as leverage at any point in the last 5 years." She paused. "Why didn't you?" Derek was quiet for a moment. He finished the last clasp on his case. "I got what I came for," he said. "I don't carry extra weight." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about asking more. She decided that she had, in those 8 words, received the answer that actually explained him, and that asking for more would only give her more words without more understanding. "Have a safe journey," she said. "You too," he said, and then he picked up his case and walked out. Nate was already in the corridor, talking cheerfully to one of the guards about the fermented paste situation and whether there were other food options he might have better luck with. Derek passed him and he fell into step automatically, still talking. The journey back to the port was quiet. The honor guard was still there, still full armor, still 22 soldiers. Derek thanked them again as he boarded the ramp. The senior aide stood at the base of the dock and watched the Clearwater's ramp seal with an expression that was difficult to read. The ship undocked cleanly and rose through the silver sky. In a high orbit above Dovar Prime, a Xyrath observation vessel sat with its sensors quiet and its running lights low. It had been there for 2 days, listed on the compact traffic registry under a routine survey designation. In its forward observation room, Vilira stood at the viewport. Beside her, her aide, a young female Xyrath officer named Vel, watched the Clearwater clear the upper atmosphere and begin its transit burn. "Princess," Vel said, "the negotiation concluded successfully. Full concessions from the Dorvani on all major points." "I know," Vilira said. "The human envoy is departing now." "I know." Vel waited for further instruction, and when none came, she waited a little longer, and when that passed she asked carefully, "What are you thinking about, Princess?" Vilira didn't answer immediately. She watched the Clearwaters burn, a small bright point against the dark, diminishing with distance. She watched it the way she had watched it at Velthar, like a person watching a thing that deserves to be watched, not for drama, but because it means something and you are aware of that meaning even if you cannot fully name it. "I'm thinking," she said at last, "that we have spent 1,000 years believing that what makes a warrior dangerous is power. Size, firepower, numbers, the ability to take more punishment than the enemy and give more back." The burn faded as the Clearwater reached distance. "And then there's him." She paused. He walked into a Dorvana prison station alone and walked out with 200 people and left the guards breathing and the doors locked behind him and not a single alarm went off. He sat across the table from people who were afraid of him and was polite about their coffee and noticed a survey relay that nobody else had thought of. He ended a border dispute in 5 hours without raising his voice or making a single threat. Vel was very still. "He's not the strongest thing in this galaxy," Vilira said. "He's just the thing that doesn't stop. And once he decides what he came for, that's all there is. No anger. No performance. Just completion." She watched the last of the light from the burn. "I don't think the galaxy has quite worked out yet how much more frightening that is than anything it's seen before." The Clearwater crossed the threshold of the system's inner boundary and made its jump. The light of it lasted 1 second, then it was gone, and the stars were quiet again, and the dark was the same dark it had always been. "Plot us a course for home," Vilira said. "Yes, Princess," Vel said. In the narrow crew space of the Clearwater, somewhere in the deep between stars, Nate Briggs was reheating something from the galley and talking about it to no one in particular. Derek Cole had his book open again. He was almost at the last chapter now. There was coffee cooling next to him, forgotten again. He turned a page. Outside, the stars moved past in silence, the way they always had, unchanged by the small and unremarkable ship passing through them, carrying one small and unremarkable man who had already decided, in some quiet room inside himself, that he was enough. He had always been enough.